Hello and welcome to Cultivate Abundance. I thought on this beautiful day I would take advantage of the new camera I've just received to give you a tour of the kitchen garden. Now let's start with one of the highlights, this beautiful Titan sunflower. Now this is one of the best varieties to grow for oil or food because the seed head on this one will get up to 2 feet wide. And this plant right here is now 6 to 7 feet tall, probably closer to 7. And may still grow another foot before it sets blossom. So a wonderful plant, just growing very vigorously. And underneath it is a nice vigorous cucumber vine. Now this is a little potato variety, a wonderful heirloom that's performs wonderfully. At least it's been performing wonderfully for me. Now I'm going to walk you through the kitchen garden and explain some of the principles and show you some of the stuff growing in it. Have quite a variety of plants. Here, growing right next to the cucumber, is a borage. Borage is a wonderful flowering herb. It adds great for attracting beneficial insects, just a generally interesting, vigorously growing plant. And then underneath it, you have peanuts coming up throughout here. Now you do see a bit of grass here, and you'll see some grass in other parts, but you'll notice there's a lot less than here. Here we had this hazelnut already planted, a great plant, and I didn't want to risk damaging it by mowing it. So this has just been mulched right on top of aggressive growing grass. Still growing wonderfully though, and everything is quite happy with it, even with a little bit of stuff coming up through. And here's a nice basil plant doing very nicely. And this basil plant, being planted so close to the hazelnut, will help prevent pests around the hazelnut. And again, lots of peanut under the hazelnut. And this peanut was inoculated, so it's going to be fixing lots of nitrogen. And then go around, you have another borage. And now I want to show you something interesting. This is a wild nightshade. Some people might call this a weed. I, however, do not pull it up because it's poisonous. And you might say, well, why would you leave a poisonous plant in your garden? Well, the answer is that it's not just poisonous to me. It's poisonous to a lot of other things that might try to preempt me and get to my vegetables first. So it's a great deterrent. Now, this is one of the newer parts of the garden. But it's already growing really impressively quickly. We have a yellow crookneck squash right next to a tomato. And then we have, we have marigold. It's a red Marietta marigold. More peanuts, nice pepper. And then next to this are some perennials. There's wormwood. It's kind of hard to see from this distance. And then white sage. Then we have some new corn plants planted. However, let me show you what the early sowings of corn have done. These, the spike of that's almost 9 feet tall, maybe more than 9 feet tall. These are just growing wonderfully. And I do want to remind you that this whole bed, when I started planting it, well, this grass has been recently mown, but this was up to your knees in grass and weeds. There's a really thick tangle of it. And this is the first season. There has been no fertilizer. I haven't even been able to come in here with any compost yet. This is just with mulching and good polyculture. I'm going to get a very considerable yield this first year. So now let me get in here and explain some of the things I'm doing. Now, you see these corn plants. These are 3 different varieties: a Oaxacan green dent corn, a Aztec black corn, and a Reed's yellow corn. Now, this doesn't look very happy. However, I wish I'd been able to show you the course of its life, because this is actually a winter squash variety. This is Australian butter squash, and I almost managed to get this thing to fruit in the Georgia summer, but we had a stretch of hot weather this beginning of July, and it finally gave in. But all I lost was 1 seed, and I may not have gained any squash, but I gained a lot of biomass. And that's an important principle when you're doing permaculture design, is you have to remember not to just think about the food you get out as the yield. The other yields are what's happening in your soil. Now let's show underneath the corn, the squash, you have some beans growing over there. Might be hard to pick out on camera, but you also have mint, which is going to be a spreading aromatic pest repellent ground cover. And then next to it you have peanut. And then over here, poking up through that, is a potato. Now, this doesn't look like a very big potato, but you'd have to realize it's been buried under hay as it's grown. So it's actually probably setting quite a bit of root by now. And then moving on, we have a nice tomato plant starting to spread out. Probably could hand some staking, starting to set flower. Moving through here, here's one of the newer rows, and have a number of plants doing quite nicely in here. I have eggplant, basil, fennel, more tomatoes. I have lavender hyssop, a wonderful aromatic flowering herb that deer do not care for the smell of. Moving through here, you have a nice watermelon, really starting to stretch a little bit. The watermelons I put out have stayed very small, not growing noticeably for a little while, but once they start growing, they really grow pretty quickly. So I'm excited. I may get some watermelons off this. And then hiding in here, you have a nice opal basil, another one of the nightshades I mentioned, and this, which looks like grass, is actually chufa, a wonderful perennial edible root tuber. So just in this little patch, you have a bunch of different plants growing in very close proximity. You can barely even see the ground. Now this is very useful because it suppresses weeds, it shades the soil, which improves the growth of mycelium. The condensation, we're in a valley with a swamp, a creek, and an artificial pond. So there's extremely high humidity here. So the condensation every night is actually a considerable source of water. And with the amount of leaf surface for things to condense on, and then the amount of shade on the ground, we actually get a considerable amount of water to our plants simply by capturing and shading that precipitation from the condensation. And then looking through here, you have more peanuts. There's peanuts sown all throughout here because they're a delicious edible, great source of calories, and they fix nitrogen. And they're a very low growing ground cover that's not particularly competitive. So a really nice plant to have. Now, this monstrosity is a black beauty zucchini, and it has grown really aggressively out here. I've been very pleased with it. And if you look underneath it, why we have okra growing in with the zucchini. And now this is actually one of the only okra that's doing well. Now, your first instinct might be, oh, well, it's going to compete with the zucchini, and the zucchini is taking away all its sunshine. Well, it turns out that these okra are actually fairly easily sunburnt, which I did not realize prior, and I have learned because of this one. Now, plants move. They move very slowly, so often we don't notice, but this okra can actually move underneath the zucchini if it needs shade and move back out if it needs more sun. And it actually really likes this growing arrangement. Now under here we have a nice physalis. I'm honestly not entirely sure which this is. It could be a ground cherry, a garden huckleberry, or a sunberry. But it also seems to be doing quite nicely, living in symbiosis with this zucchini. Now next to it you have another tomato. And yes, you may notice these tomatoes are relatively small for this time of year. I've been late putting them out, but we have an extremely long growing season here. So I think most of these will still set fruit. I think we still have plenty of time. Moving on, again, you see things growing out of the edges and doing quite nicely. You see this little flower hiding underneath the zucchini, but you see it pokes out just as much as it needs to get the sun. And if you can peer through there, we have a couple of zucchinis that'll be ready to pick quite soon. Moving on, again, growing right next to it. This is really important. This is what you call closed canopy design. You want your plants really close together. A lot of times people have this mistaken sense that all plants are competitive with all other plants and need to be protected from each other. But most plants are actually symbiotic. And if you study the growth parameters of the plants, you'll find certain plants are particularly symbiotic. Some do take some issue with each other. But you can plant them in a way that you can get as much density of planting as possible while limiting the competition. And here you have a red sunflower, grown mostly as an ornamental. The seeds are relatively small, but they are still edible, and it's just adding nice variety to the garden. Here you have a sweet potato growing very nicely. Some minor munching by the deer, but the deer have just harvested enough to fill themselves up without hurting the plant. I'm not too concerned with that. I haven't really had any problems with deer. That as many of them as there are around here, they mostly leave my stuff alone. This is actually the first time they've nibbled from my garden. And probably because I've been away visiting family over the week, they noticed I was gone and figured they'd sneak in. Now here we have a lovely plant. This is a Purple de Milpa tomatillo. This is an interesting heirloom because it actually grows wild in the cornfields of Mexico. So I actually wasn't aware of that when I planted this particular cultivar, but now I'm going to start interplanting it with my corn a lot more. I figure if it grows wild in cornfields, it'll probably do quite nicely in my little patches of corn. And again, diversity is the key. Here you actually see a Koshihikari rice cultivar, which I'm growing as experimental. This particular patch stays soggy a lot because of the type of soil, because of the contour of the land. And that's another important thing. Paul Wheaton uses this little mnemonic, add texture to the land. It's really excellent advice. And in addition to adding texture to the land, you have to pay careful attention to what plants grow well in which areas and start to massage your planting patterns to suit the patterns of the land. You don't want to homogenize the land. You don't want to homogenize your planting patterns. You want to diversify them, but use clever, sensitive observation and plant symbiotically. Plant in synergy with the natural contours of your land, the natural places where precipitation gathers. And as you can see, most of the garden is more recently planted, but it's starting to fill in. You can see the different ages here. This first row, of course, was planted much earlier than the others, and it's filled in beautifully. You can see that nice contrast. It's that dense, thick mat of green. But you can see the ends there. The middle row was planted afterwards, and then the last row was planted a little bit later. And then this part has been planted recently, as has this part over here, and underneath this blue tarp is some compost that should be ready to go on the garden very soon. So this is working beautifully. I'm very pleased. And there's a lot more variety of plants in here and a lot more going on, but I think I've gone on long enough and you get the general concept. If I start with the corn, beans, and squash, I plant that down the row, and I use that as kind of a scaffolding. And then I go back in, and as seedlings are ready for transplant, I just plant them in places where it looks like they would fit well, based on their moisture requirements, based on their affinity for the plants next to them, based on the amount of empty space. And it's about an intuitive process, dialoguing with the soil, just paying attention to what does what when you put it where, and gently coercing it into growing a nice, dense, symbiotic ecology. So that's enough for today. I'll keep you posted as this garden fills in. I think by the end of summer it will be beautiful, and I have plans to expand the coverage of it quite substantially by next fall. So until next time, peace and permaculture.